Append?
Append. Okay, so append is specifically for lists. So you're on the right track. We are appending. The idea is the same, but with dictionary. So if I were to go back here, Python dictionary. So I did include those two links for you to read, to take a look at. Now, I know sometimes it can get a little bit overwhelming when you're like trying to read documentation. But this is a really great website. It has everything kind of broken down. So how to create a dictionary, how to print dictionary. So if you're ever stuck and you're like, I don't remember how to add items. So you're going to scroll down. You're going to try to find add items. So you see on the left, there's add items. Sorry, I don't know if it's hard to see. Let me zoom in a little bit. But you're essentially asking yourself, what do I need to know? Can I see it somewhere? Add items. Beautiful. Oh, here they have a beautiful example. So I have this existing dictionary, and if I want to add something to my dictionary, I can put the name of my dictionary in square brackets. What do I want my key to be? And what is the value, right? So remember with dictionaries, I know we didn't do them for a while, but we have keys and values, right? So remember we had that analogy of like opening the door with a very specific key. So I see something in the chat. Okay, Vincent gave us, okay, yeah, so that looks self.attendance student name. Yeah, beautiful. Exactly. So where's my file? That's exactly what we're gonna do. So if you're ever stuck, utilize Google. It's my best friend. And there's times that even I don't remember something, and that's totally okay, right? So good thing we have this available. Look up the syntax, and that's gonna be really, really useful for you. Beautiful. Yes, awesome. I'm happy that you all used self dot. That way we're actually able to access this dictionary over here. So we have self dot attendance as or with square brackets, we want to add that key, right? So that would be student name, student underscore name, and then we're going to set that equal to present, right? Whether they're present or not. So you could have, I see you both did is present. Perfect, present. I'm going to just do present. Beautiful. And that's going to allow us to add the name as a key. So that could be Bob, and then present, which would be a Boolean, either true or false. Awesome. Okay, we knocked one method out. The next one we have is count present, which returns the number of students marked present. Okay, so this one is a bit difficult. You have to iterate through the dictionary. So you would have to look through loop dictionaries and probably go through this example. It allows you to loop through the values because essentially, where's my file? There it is. We want to figure out the number of people who are present. Now that would be the values, right? We don't care about the keys because that would be the names. We care about the values, which are, again, let me go back to that example I had here, which are either true for present or false for absent, right? So that's what we care about. So hopefully you had a chance to look through this website over here. I believe I linked that one as well, Loop Dictionaries. Okay, and this example allowed you to learn how to loop through the values, but it's okay if you didn't get it. We haven't touched on those for a while. But regardless, let's try that method out. So we're going to do DEF, we're going to do count present, and I'm only going to need self, right? I don't really need any arguments for it, okay? Now there's a couple different ways that you could have gone about doing it. There's no really, like there's many different ways to go about doing it. So I'll show you the way that I would go about it. So I would have a variable to keep track of the count, right? So it goes back to when we were doing while loops and for loops. Remember we had that counter variable that would allow us to specifically keep track of some sort of counter. So I'm going to initialize that to 0, right? We're initially starting with the assumption that we have 0 students present. And every time we find one student that is present, we're going to add 1 to it. Okay, so I'll give you all 30 seconds, a minute to try to figure out, I'll leave this up, how to loop through your dictionary if you haven't already given that a go. So you're going to use a for loop. You're going to use this syntax, and you're going to want, hint, hint, an if statement inside, right? So you're going to loop through every single value. And if the value is true, then you're going to increase 1. right? So that's sort of the logic that you're going for. So I'll give you all about a minute to tackle that on your own. And I'll leave this up for you to take a look at. So you're using this syntax over here. And then we'll take it up in a minute. Okay, I'm seeing a lot of you are giving it a go, which is great. Awesome job. This one is a tricky one, so. Okay, let's take a look at it. Do any of you have any ideas on how we can construct just that first little line for the for loop? So I'll put this back up so you have an idea. You can type it in the chat. Yes, Ellie, what do you think?
For student in count present dot values parentheses print student.
So you're so close, Ellie, so close. What do we want to loop through? So you said count present, right? Is that what we want to loop through? Let's go back over here. Where do we have all of this data? Let me rephrase that question. Where do we store all of the students that are either present or not present?
Self-attendance.
Yes, exactly. So you were totally on the right track, but we want to loop through attendance, not count present, because count present is a method, but we have all the data on which students are present or not present in our dictionary, right? So you're so close. It was really great, but I'm going to do exactly what you said. So for, you could do student, whatever. For student, I'm going to do for student present. Now, again, this is just a temporary variable. Now, remember when we did our loops little lesson? This is just a temporary variable. You could call it blah. You could call it whatever you want. This doesn't really mean anything. This is just a temporary variable to represent every single item that we have in whatever we're looping through. So remember, we could loop through strings, and if we were to do for letter in below, this variable over here would represent every single letter in my string, right? It would go through it one by one. Now, if we're looping through a dictionary, it would loop through one by one each set of keys and values, right? Now, if we're using dot values, then it would just go through each value one by one, okay? So I'm going to go if for student present, this is just going to represent each value in self.attendance, right? And then we're going to go back to what we learned here. We're going to use dot values. If we don't do dot values, it's going to go through every pair of keys and values. We don't care about the key, right? We don't care about the student name. We just want to see how many students are present. So in this case, we can just use dot values. Now I encourage you, if it's hard for you to visualize this, I think I showed you all this resource. It's called Python Tutor. If you guys want me to go more in depth about how to use it, I can definitely show you how to do it. But essentially, I think I posted it a while ago. I can repost it. You can click edit code. You can paste your code into here and then click visualize execution. And it really helps you see step by step what's going on, because what we're learning right now is very abstract. This is like difficult stuff. And if you're struggling, I really recommend trying to use this tool to visualize it. It'll show you step by step exactly what's happening. But this is exactly it. This is what we're going for. We have our for loop, which is beautiful. Okay, so now it's going to go through the entire list. It's going to go through, okay, true first, then it's going to go to false, or whatever our dictionary is. How do we want to check if a student is present or not? We obviously need an if statement. Can anybody tell me? You can type in the chat. What would my if statement look like?
If student present, if student present is equal to true.
Yep. Yep. Beautiful. That's exactly what we're going to do. Make sure you guys are all using two equal signs, because if I just do this, it's going to say, are you trying to create a variable? But we just want to check if it's equal, right? So if a student is present, it's going to equal true. So we're essentially just saying if the student is present, which is true, this is our variable, right? Temporary variable that is going to store every single value one by one. If that's true, what do we do? What do you all think? What am I going to do inside this if statement?
Print present.
Yes, well, you're on the right track, but we want to count. We want to return the number of students that are present. So we want to probably do something with our counter variable, right? I see Caroline added something in the chat. Yes, we're going to increment count plus equals 1. Beautiful. Now, again, you could do, like this is the shorthand, and we've used it quite a few times, but this is essentially the same thing as doing this. We're incrementing count by 1. Or you could just do the shorthand, which is like this. So it's adding 1. So we're essentially, what we're doing in this loop is we're going through each value one by one. If it's true, that means a student is present. So we're going to say, beautiful, let's add it to our count. Our count is going to represent the total amount of students that are present. Now, once we're done doing this, it will go through the entire dictionary. All we want to do is return count, right? So make sure that when you're returning, you're outside of the for loop, because if I do my return statement right under count, if it goes in here one time, then it would just return right away, remember? So we have to make sure that we only return once it's done the for loop. So we have to be outside of the for loop. So this was also a little bit of a tricky part. This was a tricky question. I know I say this a lot, but it really is a tricky question. Bit of a challenge. Beautiful. Okay, so that is count present. Now, count absent, now that we know how to do count present, I'll give you all a minute. Now, it's very, very, very similar. Very, very similar. There's only one little tweak. One tiny little tweak. I'll give you all. Oh, what am I doing? I'll give you all about a minute to work on count absent. Now it's very, 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 very similar to count present. Just one little tiny tweak. Because essentially we're doing the opposite. We're not counting how many students are there. We're counting how many students are absent. Now there's a couple different ways we could go about it. So I'll give you all about 1 minute. Yes, I'm seeing a few really great answers. I'm seeing one person did it the shorter way, which is great. That's kind of what I was going to also go towards. Beautiful. So there's a lot of different ways that we could go about solving this question. And that's the beauty of coding. There's no right or wrong answer. I mean, as long as you get to the right expected output, but there's so many different ways that we could solve it. Okay, so would anybody like to share their logic of how they went about solving it? Again, you can type in the chat, you can speak up, just like the idea of what they did. Or maybe what they think is the right way to do it. So it's very similar to count present, a little bit different. I see Ellie posted. So Ellie, you're so close, so close. Now we're gonna go down that route. You are super duper close. So, okay. The idea is very similar to this. We are going to need a for loop, right? That I think we're all on the same page about. So for, we could say student absent. We are going to need another counter. So let me also add that as well. So count equals 0. For student absent in self dot attendance dot values. Okay, we're still looping through all the values. Now, again, remember, when we go back to this, let me add a few more examples so you could see Chloe. Okay, she's, let's say, also absent. Okay, so let's say we have these three examples. Okay, I don't know why they're not lined up. We have these three examples in our, let's pretend this is self-attendance, just for the sake of it. We have our loop, we're looping through the values. When we have our if statement, we're gonna obviously do something with student absent. We wanna see if it's equal to some sort of Boolean value, okay? Now, what Boolean? We have two options, true or false. What Boolean value would represent if a student is absent?
False.
False. Beautiful. Exactly. So that's the one little tweak that you had to do, Ellie. Everything else is great. Is you have to check if it's false, if the student is not present, right? If it's false. Okay, that way we're going to increase count plus equals 1. And then we're going to do the same thing where we return count. Now, there was another way to do this. I saw one student did this, which is really great. You could do it another way. We already have a function that counts the number of students that are present. Okay, so you could have used that function to help you find how many are absent. You could find essentially the total number of students and then subtract the amount of students that are present. And that would give you how many are absent. So that's another route that you could have gone down, right? So there's many different ways, many different solutions for one problem, but this is one of them. Great. Do we have any questions about that? Nope. Awesome. Great. Okay, and then our last function that we have is list absent students. So returns a list of students who are marked absent. So this would return their names as well. Okay, so list absent students returns a list of students who are marked absent. So returning a list over here. Okay, so let me go back here. So DEF. What was I supposed to call it? List absent students. So I'll give you all a couple like minutes to try this one on your own if you haven't already. But essentially you want to return a list of the students' names that are absent. So you're gonna need to use a loop, but you need their names as well. So this one would not quite work, and this one would not quite work. So we could use either dot keys or dot values. That wouldn't quite work because we need both the keys and the values. So we have another type of loop. I don't know if they show it here. Yes, they do. This one over here. So it's dot items. So you probably will want to use this one. It allows you to loop through both the keys and values. So if I were to run this example over here, sometimes it's helpful to see an example. So let's say I have this dictionary over here that has brand as a key, model as a key, year as a key, and these are the values. So the brand is a Ford, Mustang is the value for the model key, and 1964 is the value for the year key. Now, if I use this for loop, so I'm saying, let me change it up so it's a little bit easier to visualize. Key value. I'm basically saying for key, comma value in my dictionary dot items, it's going to allow me to do it as pairs, loop through it as pairs. Print key value. We don't need to print, but essentially what's going to happen is it's going to do brand, Ford, model, Mustang, year 1964. So this is the loop that you're going to want to use for this question. So give you all about another minute to give that a go. But remember, you want to return a list of student names that are absent. So remember, try to think of it. What are my keys? What are my values? Make sure you're also using like instead of X and Y, I find it also helpful to use something that's meaningful, right? Helps you kind of understand what exactly you're looping through. I mean, you don't have to if you're feeling comfortable with it, but let's take a look. Okay. I'm seeing all of you are giving it a go, which is awesome. So again, remember, we want to return a list. So a list of absent student names, okay? So we're gonna want to start with an empty list. Absent students is equal to an empty list, right? We're starting off with an empty list and we're going to append to that list or add to that list every time we come across a student that's not present, okay? So that's our first little bit. Now, in terms of the for loop, we're going to start off with a for. And what I mentioned earlier about having meaningful names is I use typically like names that are representative of what that key is and what the values are. So the keys are student names. So you could do student name. And then the value is whether they're present or not. So present. Or you could do is present. Doesn't matter. Okay. And then we're obviously looping through that dictionary, right? So in self.attendance.items, right? Dot items will give us access to the keys and the values, okay? I'm gonna do a colon. There we go. Does anybody have an idea what should my if statement be? Like in what condition should I add a student to my absent list? So I'm gonna have a conditional statement. When should I add a student to absent students? Does anybody have any ideas? When should I add to this list? And under what condition?
If is present is equal to false.
Exactly, yes. So if is underscore present is equal to false, right? That's the condition, right? If they're not present, then we're going to add their name to our list. Does anybody remember how do we add to lists? What is our keyword?
Append.
Yes, good job. So we're going to use absent underscore students dot append, and we're going to append their name, right? So student name. And then once we're done looping through it, make sure you go outside of the for loop, because if I were to, again, return here, it would return early. It wouldn't finish the for loop. So you want to make sure that you're returning outside of the for loop. And when I say outside, you basically want to be on the same line. So you see how in Replit they give you these lines? It's very useful. So return, we want to return this list, absent students. There we go. That is our class. Okay, so I'm going to delete this little section so we can create some objects, but give me a thumbs up if everything makes sense, if we're comfortable, or if you have any questions, please, please, please let me know. Give me a thumbs up if we're feeling good, we understand what we're doing. Yeah. Awesome. This one was a challenging one, so give yourself a pat on the back. This was a difficult one. I'm seeing thumbs up from Caroline and Vincent. Claire and Ellie, how are we feeling about this one? Just want to make sure we're all on the same page.
Good.
Good. Awesome. Beautiful. I see thumbs up. Great. This makes me very happy. And then we can just test it out, right? So I'm going to zoom out for a second. I'm just going to delete, well, comment this out for now. And open up my console. So, I mean, I won't spend too much time on this just because I think you're all doing really great. And essentially to test it out, don't just leave your code ever like this, okay? And say, I think it's right, so it's gonna be right, I'm moving on. Always test it out. Even I sometimes think it's right, and I go back to test it and I'm like, huh? So make sure you're testing it out. So we can create object one, whatever you wanna call it, attendance, okay, is equal to student attendance, right? So we're creating an object, and now we want to mark some students present and others as absent. So we can do this by calling our function, mark attendance, right? So I'm going to call this attendance dot mark attendance. And then we're going to need, remember, two values, the student name and if they're present or not. So
I have a question, Miss Katrin. Do we
yes,
put anything in the student attendance class?
in over here,
Yeah.
great question. So if I go back, so anytime you have that question, what I want you to do is go back to your init method and take a look. Is there anything after self?
No.
No. So then you don't need anything. If as long as we have like just self, that's fine. But as long as we have something else, then we need arguments. But right now we see that we don't need anything. So we just leave it empty. We're initializing. Every time we create an object, all it has is an empty dictionary for attendance. So we don't need to include anything here. That was a really good question.
Thank you, Miss Katrin.
No problem. So we're going to create our very first student, Alice. We're going to put true. Let's say Alice is here. Okay. Now I want all of you to create at least 3 more students. Some are true, some are false. And I want all of you to post one line in the chat of you calling this function with a different student. Just to make sure we're all good with that. You're going to create 3 more students. So that we have at least 4 students. The more the merrier, you can create more. So I'm seeing something. So make sure you're doing it separately. So we cannot do it like this. This is going to have to be separate calls to this function, right? Because remember, if we go look at mark attendance only takes 2 values, one single student name and if they're present or not present, right? So we're going to have to call this multiple times for each different student. Just like this. Okay, so hopefully it looks something like this. Make sure you have at least 4 different calls to creating 4 different students with at least 2 true, 2 false. That way it's nice 50-50. Okay, you can create more. Let's do one more, why not? Okay, and we'll give him Joanna. Okay, so make sure you're having different calls to this method. It cannot be all in one, okay? Let me see how you're all doing. Beautiful, beautiful, awesome, great. I'm seeing lots of great. Okay, now, okay, well, if we click run, nothing will really happen, right? We need to call our methods over here. So let's test out first one being the count present. Okay, so I want all of you to call that method count present and see if it works. Now remember, it's a return, right? So if I just call that, nothing's gonna happen. So remember that. So call your count present method. Let's see if it works. See how you're all doing. Okay, let's take a look. So
I have a question of what do you do for mark attendance again?
So mark attendance over here, what we're doing is we're adding students to this dictionary that we have over here, this empty. So for mark attendance, what's happening is we're adding students, their names, as well as if they're absent or not, which is a Boolean, either true or false. So let's say today, Claire, if I wanted to add Claire, she's present, she's in class. So I can call this method and say, okay, Claire, and she's present. So I'm going to put true. So this is going to add you to my dictionary. The key would be Claire, that's your name, right? And then the value would be a Boolean if you're present or not present, which in your case is true. So right now what we're doing is we have these lines over here. We're just adding students one by one. So Alice is present, Bob is not. He didn't show up to class. Uh-oh. Charlie is present, David is not present, Joanne is not present. So we have to do this in separate lines.
Thank you.
No problem. Can anybody tell me, how can I call my count present method? Would anybody like to put it in the chat or say it out loud? How can I call that method? So it would print how many students are in class or showed up. Yes. Good job, Vincent. Yeah. So if I were to do attendance, dot count present, that, and I click run, nothing's gonna happen. You see, it's empty. That's because we're returning. So remember with return, when we did that little lesson on return statements, in order to actually see the result, you have to print it because return gives you the value. Now you have to actually catch it, quote unquote, and print it. So I'm gonna surround this into a print statement.
I have a question, Miss Katrin. Mine says that that my code has an attribute error.
Let's take a look. Student attendance object has no attribute attendance. Line 358. Where's line 358? Oh, so if you take a look,
Oh, spelling error?
it should be values. And yeah, it could be a spelling error because you have an A after the D. Like it should be an A. Yeah. That should fix it. Try clicking run again. Yeah.
Thank you.
No worries. It should fix it for you. But yeah, going back over here, you could just do this line. And if you're feeling,
Mine has another problem.
oh, let's take a look. What is it saying? Did you mean line 381? Huh. Okay, let me take a look at this. It's probably just like a spelling error. Let me just get through this and then I'll take a look at it before we end, just so that I can get through with it. But I think it's just like a spelling error, but just give me 1 second. We'll just finish off with this. So this allows you to count present, and then you're going to do the same thing for counting the numbers of students that are absent. Okay, you're going to go ahead, do the same thing, count absent. Okay, and we click run. We see we got 2 students present and 3 students absent. So make sure that actually makes sense. And you could be fancy. You could put it into a nice formatted string. So number of students present. I'm going to do the same thing here. Number of students absent. Okay, so now when we click run, it's a little bit easier to see. And now for our last function, list absent students. I want all of you to try calling that as well. So print, put that into a print statement because we're also returning. So you might want to do it like nicely. List of all students absent. So make sure you try calling that method. And essentially you're going to do the same thing. You're going to call your object attendance dot the name of that method. You're going to click run. And you should see list of all students that are absent: Bob, David, Joanna. Now, if you want to be a little bit fancier, you could put it into a for loop and say, these are all the students. That way you don't have these like square brackets, but doesn't matter. And yeah, this is how we would call all our methods, make sure it works. And double check to make sure that it actually makes sense, that the students that are printed are actually absent. So Bob, David, and Joanna. Bob is false, David is false, and Joanna is false, right? Make sure it actually corresponds and that the values are correct. But this is it. This is the question. This was a tough one. Dealing with dictionaries are tough, but now you're all really good at dealing with dictionaries and accessing values, looping through them. This was a tough one. So if you have any errors, I'll get back to you. So just hold on tight. I'll get back to you. I do just want to share with the other students what our task is. So I know I mentioned this before that we're going to do this, but I wanted to do a few more practice questions like the ones today because this one is a bit tough. So this is the virtual library management. We spoke about this briefly, but I wanted to do some more practice before we tackle that one. This one is a bit long, so I am going to assign this for homework. Now, don't feel like you need to complete all of it. We will do it together, but I did give you very, very detailed instructions. So it looks like a lot, but it's just a lot of detail. I explain everything that you need to do, all of the instructions, all of the different methods. So again, it looks like a lot of writing. And then the last little bit is just advanced features. If you want to be fancy, you can add a little bit, challenge yourself. But really all that we're going to be covering is just steps 1, 2, and 3. And again, it's just a lot of detail so that you guys have some hints I also gave. That way you're able to do it for homework. So I will post this link in the Google Classroom. So that way you can all get started on it. We have about 10 minutes. I was going to introduce something new, but I don't think we have enough time. So I am going to put this up on the Google Classroom. Share viewer. Yes, beautiful. And I want all of you to read through it, give it a go. You can get started. If you have any questions, let me know, but this would be your homework per se. And if you don't finish it all, don't worry. This is a pretty hefty project. But again, it's very detailed. So if you do have questions, obviously let me know. But I did include as much detail as possible. I used lots of examples. But essentially the project, the main idea is you're going to create this virtual library system. Okay, so pretend you're a librarian and you have a bunch of books. You're going to be able to add books. You're going to be able to check out books. And a few other methods. So I posted on the Google Classroom. Let me know if you don't see it. It's going to be your homework. For those of you who have errors, can you please raise up your hand? So I'm going to go to Claire first, but does anybody else have any errors? Everybody else is good? Okay, great. Let's take a look, Claire. Okay, so it's telling you, let's see. Student absent is not defined. Line 368. Okay, let's go from the top. Okay, that looks good. Want to make sure. Okay, so first little thing that I see is take a look at line 359 for count absent. True would represent if they're present, right? Remember, the value is either true or false. True if they're present and false if they're absent. So we want to change that to false for checking if a student is absent, and only then do we add to counters. That's the first little thing I see. Yes, there we go. You also added that over there. The error specifically though is on line 368. Self-dot attendance. Oh, so again, so take a look at line 368. You're saying if student absent. Now what they're telling you is they're like, well, what's student absent? Because you only have two current variables. You have student name and present. So here you would just need to replace this with present, because that's the variable that represents if a student is present or not. And now
Thank you.
when we click run, we see it works. Beautiful. Awesome job. Great. So yeah, I posted it up on the classroom. We do have 10 minutes. We could do a short introduction to our next lesson. So I thought there would be a little bit more errors, but I'm happy that we got through it. So we do have 10 minutes. So we could actually go through our next big topic, just as a little introduction, because why not? So if I could get all of your attention, we're gonna take a look at something interesting. So has anybody heard of inheritance, encapsulation, abstraction, or polymorphism? Those are some big, hefty words. I promise you, they sound a lot scarier than they really are. Has anybody heard those words? If you have, raise your hand up. No? Great. Inheritance. Okay, Vincent has heard of inheritance. Beautiful. So that's gonna be the first one we tackle. So we have learned about classes. You guys are little geniuses on classes, and that's a very big concept in programming, whether it's Python or JavaScript or Java. Every single programming language has this concept of objects, right? What is object-oriented programming? We're just representing objects in coding as if we do in the real world, right? We have water bottles, right? Every water bottle holds water, and we can create different types of colored water bottles, different sizes, right? So that's the idea behind what we've been doing so far. Now, we can go even deeper into this. And we have these 4 different pillars that make up object-oriented programming, okay? And so we're going to explore each one of these. There's a lot more. We're just going to scratch the surface. But they're very, very interesting. So we have these 4 big ones: encapsulation, abstraction, inheritance, and polymorphism. Okay, we're going to start off with inheritance. Okay, inheritance, sort of like the word inheritance, is, think of it like a family tree. Okay, when you are born, you take traits from your parents, right? Perhaps you have the same eye color as your dad or hair color as your mom, right? You inherit certain traits. So think of it like a family tree. You could inherit certain traits from your grandma, from your great-grandparents, right? So that's the main idea behind inheritance. Okay, so within coding, we have 2 types of terms that we're gonna be using. Okay, we have the parent class and we have the child class. Now, people use sometimes different terms for it, but typically we'll stick to parent class, and then child class will be sometimes called a subclass. Those are the 2 keywords that we're going to stick to. It's very easy to visualize. So the parent class is the class that gives or passes its features, right? So again, always think about it. Oh, I have the same hair color as my mom. That's your parent class, right? You inherited it. And the child class is, think of it like you, right? This is the class that inherits certain features. Okay, now why do we care about this? Why is it useful? Well, it allows us to reuse code, and we're going to look at some examples. It saves us time and effort, and we love that, right? The idea behind it is anything that the parent class has, you can create a child class and it will inherit everything from that class. Okay. So we have different types of inheritance. Now there's 5 different types, and we're going to explore all of those separately. So we're going to start off with single inheritance. Okay, but we also have multiple inheritance, we have multi-level, we have hierarchical, and we have hybrid. Okay, so let's start off with single level. We have about 5 minutes, but essentially the idea is you inherit from one single parent. Okay, and you inherit all the attributes and methods And again, it's really useful because you don't have to rewrite code. If I create two classes and I know that they have some similarities, this might be a useful thing that I could do. So let's look at an example so that we have a better idea. So let's say I create this parent class. Now there's nothing new in this specific one, but I have this parent class over here and I have my init method. It just takes in nothing. And all I do is I have this one single variable, which is just called parent attribute, and I set it equal to I am a parent attribute, okay? So this is specific to my parent class. It's just a variable, okay? And then I have one single function, one method inside this parent class that is parent method, which all it does is return a string that says, this is a method from the parent class. Okay, do we understand this? This is nothing really new. This is easy peasy, right? Give me a thumbs up if this makes sense. Okay, one thumbs up from Vincent, from Ellie, from Claire. Caroline, we're doing good with this one as well, just making sure. Beautiful. Okay, so again, we just have this one variable parent attribute, which is just a string, and we have one method, which just prints this is a method from the parent class. Okay, and then we have this child class. Okay, now one thing that you'll notice right away, perhaps, is notice how we have this over here. Are you guys able to see my mouse when I move it? Yeah, I should probably get like one of those pointers. That will make it a little bit easier to use and see. I think I have one. Draw. Oh, there we go. Beautiful. So notice how I have this child class, and notice in my circle brackets up to now, we never included anything in those brackets. But when we're doing inheritance, we're saying this child class is based or inherits from the parent class. So we include that in those circle brackets. Okay, and that's going to allow us to inherit all of the attributes and all of the methods from that parent class. So that's the one first key difference we see. We include parent over here. Okay. Oops. How do I exit? Oh no, I feel like, there we go. Okay. The next key difference you'll see is in our init method of the child, okay, nothing new. In order to inherit everything from the parent, well, we just need to call the init method of the parent class, okay? So I'm saying parent dot init. You're gonna literally copy and paste like the init method. So the init method right now doesn't have any arguments, doesn't have any parameters after self, but you still need to include self. So essentially we're directly calling it the parent's init method. And that's going to allow us to inherit all of the attributes, all of the methods. That way we can use it in the child class. Okay. And then we have another child method. Okay. That prints this is a method from the child class. And we also have a child attribute that says I'm a child attribute. Okay. Now this is where it gets interesting. Right now it's quite boring. This is where it gets interesting. When I go to create an instance of the child class, this is again, nothing new. We call child instance, we call the child class, right? This we know how to do, okay? If I try to print child instance parent method, it's gonna allow me to access it. Now we're running out of time. I can't really, I wish I could put this in the console and show you, but essentially it's going to call that parent method, which is this one over here, and it's going to print this line over here. So the idea here is the main key takeaway I want you all to understand is that we're able to, anything that we inherit, we're able to access it. And now we're going to look at a lot of examples that really showcase the purpose of it, because right now it's kind of like, okay, well, and what am I going to use it for? We're going to look at a lot of examples that show us the purpose of it, why we need it, how it's helpful to us. But the main idea that I want you all to take away is that it takes everything from the parent class and is able to be accessed from the child class.